if you're trying to do something that, 12 million other people are right now currently also trying to do, chances are mathematically you'll never succeed, except if you do it because you love it without expectations of anything immediate.
Mixcloud.
The Inside Track.
Hello, welcome everybody to the inaugural Inside Track podcast. I'm joined by our very first guest, the legendary Francois K. Francois, it's great to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, no worries. It's an honor to have you as our very first guest. I've been listening to your mixes and productions and remixes for a very long time. I was actually just before we started the recording talking about the Hamilton Bohannon tribute mix that you did on Worldwide FM a couple of years ago. Great mix to run to. Can make that as a recommendation.
I did it right after he passed away, and
yeah,
it was, sadly, someone who I considered a very close friend or good friend who left us, and it's difficult to handle, but there it is. This was one of our first live streams, actually, during the lockdown period.
Yeah, and you got into live streaming relatively early in the lockdowns, right? You were kind of pretty quick to adopt it.
4 days.
4 days. 4 days in. That's fast.
I mean, I could track back because we archive everything, but I believe that within the first week of lockdowns, which were, depending on what country you lived in, somewhere around March 13th or 15th, 2020, within less than a week, we had started doing streams to Facebook Live.
And what prompted that? Was that more kind of something that you decided that you wanted to do for listeners and people around the world? Or was there kind of requests coming in that people just wanted to hear good music?
I just felt the need to rise to the occasion because we were going through something that, I don't ever remember having anything that stressful in my entire career, to be honest with you. And in the space of 48 hours after I came home from some gigs in the UK on March 10th, in the space of that 48 hours, I lost all my work.
In what way? What do you mean?
All my bookings, everything. I was grounded.
Oh, right.
And I realized by going online, because we had already started a group called World of Echoes on Facebook that became extremely popular even before the lockdown. We gained thousands and thousands of users in a matter of a few weeks. It became clear that people were like so completely overwhelmed and more than anything in need of any sort of spiritual healings of some sort. I can't think that I've ever experienced anything close to that, to be honest. And since we're all grounded, the whole planet, I figured the only way to do that was to really leverage the amazing technologies that we have available at our fingertips, and streaming is part of that. And we started, it was pretty incredible. I still remember, even though I was using a very, very broken 10-year-old computer, because that's all I had on hand to do the streaming, and it kept crashing. I would start streaming within 30 seconds to 1 minute. I had 400 or 500 people on the stream. It was just like, what? Like, I'm, it was kind of hard to believe, but it just indicated that there really was a big need for connection. People wanted to feel that we still shared something together. Had never really streamed live before. I had done a few things like that in the past, like Lot Radio or NTS Radio or whatnot. But once you get to experience that a little bit and get a taste of it, it kind of felt like, since I had nothing else to do, I was stuck at home, and this was like a community service. I really, first and foremost, I wasn't thinking about promoting myself or whatever. I just felt like in that particular predicament that everyone was in, people needed healing. They needed comfort. They needed something they can cling onto for sanity's sake. And as such, I just felt that streaming was a little bit of that. And if I could deliver some of this to our community, then I felt that was my mission to do it.
Yeah, I mean, music is it's a powerful force, right? And are there particular live streams that you remember as special ones?
Yes, all the ones that Facebook kept cutting off because of, the copyright enforcement mechanisms that they have in place. So they were really special because they kind of highlighted how important it is in dire time of need for copyright owners to enforce their air quotes rights at the expense of everyone's mental well-being. And it's just obvious that, copyright takes precedence over everything else, especially when you're in the middle of a pandemic. So I thought that was pretty memorable in the sense that it heralds an age where somehow bots and automated agents and, whatever else are controlling our lives. And it sort of became a cat and mouse game on how to figure out a way to find, more reliable streaming methods that wouldn't get cut off every 30 minutes.
Yeah.
That was the memorable part of it.
Yeah, there's definitely a fair few people who encountered those type of takedowns. And I believe you tried Twitch as well recently.
Of course, we built a very, very successful community there. We're pretty much constantly streaming like hundreds and hundreds of hours. I think if I'm looking at our stats, we've accumulated 1,200 hours up to now on, various platforms. And that means over 300 shows. The average length was 4 or 5 hours. In certain instances, we went up to 8 or 9.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And I think the reason we're talking today is you got in touch with us and some of my colleagues on the team because of some of the changes that are happening with Twitch and this new DJ program.
Well, the jury's still not quite out with that, as it seems, but they came up with this new structure where somehow the best way I could summarize it is a comment I read by someone who posted it on Reddit. And I think it's in a thread where you participated. Remember?
It's very possible. Is it the one about live streaming and how we've managed to do it?
Some guys say he kind of summarized it really well. He said, imagine coming to play at a club and the owner just hands you a USB stick and say, okay, these are the songs you're allowed to play tonight. And I mean, technically, of course, it's possible, but you're,
somewhat constrained.
You're pretty much corrupting the very essence of what I think makes someone such as myself a DJ. There may be other DJs, like the performative ones, who, the hand movement crowd. It's a very respectable activity. I mean, the same way P.T. Barnum created, employment opportunities for thousands of people playing, big wind instruments at circuses and all that, the same way. And for the DJ world, I don't see anything wrong with people, wearing skimping outfit type things and making all sorts of outrageous dance moves. As a matter of fact, if you go to Ibiza, I remember as an example playing at a big club there that used to be called Space. It's now renamed High. And I was playing a record and suddenly the crowd is roaring. And I look and I was like, what did I do? And of course, I didn't do anything. It was the trapeze or saber swallower person on stage that the crowd was roaring for. And the same way, obviously, this attracts a certain type of person, a certain type of customer. So there's nothing wrong with that kind of performative thing happening on streams. And music, in that respect, can probably be considered almost secondary as long as it's got the bangers and the drops and whatever. It's more about, the looks. And I respect that. But in my case, the point is that I'm not 23 years old anymore. That was 48 years ago.
I think what you said there about music being secondary is spot on. And I think that's probably the difference between a community like we have on Mixcloud, a good nightclub, DJs who are doing it for the music and for that primarily, and that's the number one priority, versus places, whether it's online or offline, where the music is kind of secondary. and it might be
Yeah,
about the
but I mean,
spectacle or something.
I don't want to like take sides in that. I think it's more an observation that in the last few years, it seems to me that there's been a fork on that road where there, through the use of advanced technology, it's enabled a number of totally inexperienced people without any skills whatsoever to step up and make themselves be seen. And whereas in the past, DJs used to be selectors or programmers, that fork has made it that now that selector category still exists. But now there's a performative category where people are more like putting on a show, and the people who go to the club, they're not there to dance. They're there to watch. I see right now a video making the rounds of Kind Music doing a closing set at High and in Ibiza, and the entire crowd has mobile phones up and nobody's dancing. And it, like the first time I saw the video, it kind of felt like straight out of Black Mirror. Like, is this real? And yeah, it is real. And it's not to say anything about those people who had their mobile phones out. Obviously, to them at that time, at that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. So I'm certainly not going to be going and slagging them if that's what they want to do. They've paid for their €100 ticket at the door and, you know, sipping their €25 drinks. And I don't see any problem with them doing that if that's what they feel like doing. But I'm trying to say in a roundabout way that when the Twitch changes happened, it seems to favor these performative, dare I say, boiler room style DJs whose goal it is to create a visual spectacle. And obviously at scale, it seems that there are many, many people who are happy to consume that sort of entertainment. I don't have a problem with it, but being that through these 1,200 hours of streaming, we were able to kind of define a little bit what my things were about. I think that I would severely feel hampered if I wasn't able to throw on whatever I felt like throwing on because someone has decided that I shouldn't really be doing it for reasons that I could go into in great detail. In my opinion, this is strictly a high-level income battle between two or groups of corporate giants. On one side, you have Amazon that's saying to Twitch, well, you're not profitable. We just did a third round of layoffs. Music streaming is only bringing 0.7% of our total income because gaming is really what it's all about. Thing is, copyright owners, whoever represents them in negotiating with Twitch, I don't know if these are done per label group like UMG and Sony and UMG all separately, but they obviously asking for some sort of license, and Twitch is not in position to have its parent company say, oh, we'll pay for the license. I mean, after all, Facebook doesn't do it. YouTube doesn't do it. No one does it because it's too onerous to them for their business model to justify the income they derive from advertising revenue being taken by the copyright owners. And I think that Twitch, because they're so unfamiliar with music streaming, had no idea whatsoever what the labels really wanted, or they weren't able to work any sort of negotiation position with them that could have given them access to a blanket license. So they've resorted to some semi half-baked copyright detection that is supposed to like kind of go along with this list of songs that they've approved. I don't know. It all feels to me very cobbled together. But if I'm going to have to be forced to participate in something like this at the expense of the very core of what makes me a DJ, I just don't find it acceptable. And I'd rather go where I feel what I do can be presented in an unadulterated manner and in a fashion where it remains kind of true to the core concept of what I always felt music should be about. That's a very big conversation to be having. There are many managers and agents and who would argue that you should always try to go to the place where there's the biggest audience, even if you have to sacrifice certain things. I just I remember I worked with the Australian band called Midnight Oil. I actually produced a few tracks for them in the 80s. And I remember one lyric in particular in one of the songs, which I think is a pretty famous quote, that said, "It's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees." And I think this latest corporate, power play is really an illustration of the slow creep into digital dominance that a lot of these big platforms are achieving at scale on people. And it doesn't sit well with me. I don't want to, end up being one of those who just kowtows to these kinds of things at the expense of the very fiber of what made me love music and continue to do so to this day, almost a half a century later. That doesn't feel right to me. It feels like something's out of balance. And these kinds of things have implications that are very profound, but they take time to set in. And I'm not willing to make that experiment. I can't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I think it comes back again to what you were saying about whether the music is primary or the music is secondary. And you can kind of see this parallel between streaming platforms and the digital online space and nightclubs and festivals and venues and, physical real world space. And there are those places that prioritize music. And there are those places where the music is kind of like background, secondary, or it's just not as important. And so, obviously I don't work at Twitch. I don't know the ins and outs of how they did their licensing, but it does feel like a platform that was built first and foremost for video gamers. And maybe music is kind of something that they're trying to add on, but it doesn't feel like it's the primary thing.
Well, again, with, little to support my statement, because I am just as unfamiliar with how the operation runs as you are, but it seems to me that they got bamboozled into these agreements for the music rights because they didn't have anyone on staff that truly understood the intricacies and Machiavellian depth to which right owners will go to in order to get what they want. And it only represents less than 1% of their core business. So maybe, part of me sometimes is thinking at that level, the multinational heavy corporate level, it's not really about fairness or anything like that. It's about who can you bully and how much can you get away with. And if you were going to really be worried about music companies feeling like they're being gypped out of their legitimate income, then please start looking at U.S. radio, who has had an exemption from paying royalties since 1937. And because they don't pay royalties to any artists, including overseas one, it means U.S. artists can't collect on foreign radio play because there's a reciprocity clause. See, we're getting into all these detailed things. Yeah. You really think that the lawyers at Twitch know about all this? I'm not sure. But it seems to me that they weren't able to quite parlay into their agreement the kind of, situations that could have made it easy for creators such as myself to remain on the platform.
I'm curious, how do you find good music today? Do you have a way that you go out and you seek new music, or?
Actually, there are so many facets to this. It is an absolutely fascinating topic, not the least because, in a sense, since our conversation has taken a very future-centric turn, I would say that I could predict pretty much that within a few years, such activities will also be performed by some personalized software agents. Not yet. In my mind, I think it brings to the conversation a recurring theme, which, having been intimately involved with technology for several decades, I keep seeing time and time again, which is the idea that it's all too easy for us to get smothered and dominated by technology because the people who design software and the interfaces to use it have put us into forced us into these gauntlets where we can only use it in certain specific manners according to their wishes for purposes that they are in control of and they decide. But yet, throughout these decades that I'm referring to, there's always been, I don't want to call us rebels, but people who love what I would say ethical hacking. And I think it's a dangerous word to use because to most people, hacking represents doing criminal activities, and that's not at all what I'm referring to. I'm talking about tinkerers, people who love to understand how to use software, including open source software, of course, and customize it to their needs. And in this instance, I think we're only a couple of years away from the idea of having personal digital assistants that greatly assist us in whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish, which includes music discovery. But since these are not available yet, I will still answer your question and say that in my case, it's really a spread. And it always was a spread. In the years when you used to have record stores, I think the record stores played a great part in that, because you went to the store and you spoke to the guy behind the counter, and they knew all the hot jams, all the hot releases. They could tell me what was flying out of the store, what was being requested a lot, what, et cetera, or they heard other people bringing in music that they thought was great. So part of that used to be you got your information from the record store. And then, of course, you're friends with all these other DJs, and they all tell you what their favorite jams are. Or you could be reading magazines that have charts, whether it's DJ Mag or Mix Mag or Billboard or wherever else you can find DJ playlists. And, there were like so many different ways that this was done. And nowadays, thing is, there are still some record stores, and I think for the most part, they're not places where people make a lot of money. I truly have a great deal of respect for people who run record stores, because you could see that they run on passion. Mm. They are very conscious that instead of just claiming they're making a ton of money from it, because I'm sure they're not, it's a labor of love. And those who run record stores, one of the amazing and beautiful things about it is that they are consciously fostering real interactions.
We got any favorites in New York?
Little communities of people. I'm not going to claim any favorites because there's just too many across the planet. As a traveling DJ, of course, I'm just as likely to find one in Tokyo as I am in Berlin or in New York or in London or Paris. I mean, yes, I do have my favorites, but still developing this idea. Thing is, nowadays, and it really goes back to what happened on January 2nd, 2020, which you're not going to be able to guess.
Around the pandemic? Something?
No, before.
Just before the 2020.
3 months before two months and 1 week before the start of the lockdown. Right after New Year's, I was sitting there and going to myself, why don't I just I had this radio show on Worldwide FM every month. And I was thinking to myself, I seem to be getting a fair amount of listeners and always good comments when I was posting my shows. Why don't I just start a little group and discuss things that I'm playing on my show? It was very much like a small community. And I decided to start this group on Facebook called World of Echoes that still exists and today has about 12,000 members. It's a private group. You can't just join it. We have to vet you and to let you in. And because of that, we've been able to keep quality of it very, very high and to completely, get rid of all the troublemakers and the trolls and the self-promoters who are only interested in contributing things that enrich them or that they think is going to help increase their visibility. So we are trying to cater to music lovers who share their enthusiasms. And today, I would say that for me, music discovery, when I'm looking for new tracks, it includes being in this group because I have 12,000 people who all in their own little neck of the wood are finding tracks and records, and some of them could be old, some brand new, whatever. And we're able to create virtual communities where a lot of that information is shared. And as well, we have a World of Echoes Discord server, which you could simply join by going discord.gg/World of Echoes, and it'll take you there. Discord is more intimate. We only have 1,000 members, but in some ways, I think outside of the reach of social networks. Discord even feels more real. And we constantly recommend things like on a daily basis. There's like all these people who really are music lovers and who all fiend for like, amazing records that I would never get to find out about any other way. So yes, the record store thing is still there when I have a chance to go and visit one, which is less frequent than it used to be. But I'm still in touch with a lot of people. I still check other people's streams at times. And once in a while, I see things being recommended by some of my friends on social media that are very credible. And they're not saying it because they're being paid to shill for someone's new release. They're saying it because they go, wow, this record is dope. And so, you got to take whatever you can. But add it to this mix, at least in my case, I'm glad I had that foresight. Maybe it was by accident, but it just turns out that now when I want to look for new stuff, and this goes beyond finding new music. So like the other day, I decided to do a stream called Cosmic Funk. And the way I go about it, a lot of times, not always, but in certain specific cases, is I will make a post in the group and say, hey guys, I'm doing a stream tomorrow. Any suggestions as to what I could play during a Cosmic Funk themed stream? And, on the average, when I add what I had through Instagram, what I had through the private Facebook group, I got so many suggestions that were all like so on point. Could I play 20% of them in one stream? So it's not a stream that they gave me. It's almost a whole series because I kind of feel a debt to those people who made these suggestions, those members. And many of them were really great. Things that I had no idea about, like some obscure Brazilian jazz funk from 1978 or some, and I
love that. I love that you're kind of like basically crowdsourcing these ideas.
But that's the point. You
from
have
people,
to use,
from humans.
As I keep using and paraphrasing the famous intro to the song by Lynn Collins, think we got to use what we got to get what we want. And the idea, again, is that instead of relying on algorithmic suggestion engines that are controlled by someone else, I'm pretty much implying that in our near future, what I'm looking forward to will be algorithmic suggestion engines controlled by each user. In other words, a personal agent that is tailor-made for each person's specification and taste, and an agent that you can query and ask specific questions like, find me some of the great music that was made in Cameroon in 1976. And how does that intersect with re-releases that were done on some of the fancy labels like Awesome Tapes from Africa or Sofrito or whatever else? So you triangulate, you use these software, you will be able to use such software agents in an intelligent manner that is fitting your needs rather than the needs of the people who control platforms that are spamming you with suggestions that are not relevant to your interests. So
do you feel like, though, it still loses a little bit, even if you had this virtual agent, it would still lose a little bit of that human connection, that fact that somebody on the Facebook group suggested this, Japanese funk album from 1970 something?
Yeah, but the thing is, just thinking ahead of what a personal software agent would be, you can't think of it as an isolated piece. Obviously, these software agents are going to be able to communicate with each other in the same way we as users are using a forum such as the one we have on Facebook to exchange ideas. You'll have to get used to the idea of your personal software agent being granted permissions to exchange data with your friend's personal software agent.
This sounded very, very futuristic.
Well, but that's where it's headed. That's just like, but the difference again, which I keep really want to point out, is that it'll be really, really important to make the distinction between a future where we are constantly forced into these gauntlets where we have no choice and no option and no control, and one where we are firmly at the helm and can decide to use these tools for our purposes according to our specific interests. And as such, I think that reflects the very core values of what our humanity is supposed to be. Just because we are translating our humanity into a virtualized version of it doesn't mean that it lacks the very same quality that we pride ourselves in having in real life. It's just a different tool, but it's foremost important for us to keep in mind, not to be used by these tools, but always be in a place where we can steer them in the direction we want them to, as well as ignore those we don't want, and never feel like we're being bamboozled. So as long as we can retain that and the ability to use them to share among each other all the things we love and all that, I don't think I see a problem. I mean, it never makes up for the idea that you're in a room together with three of your friends and you guys, everybody can like jam together and go through things in a tactile manner by showing each other tapes or records or CDs or whatever, physical media. There's obviously a certain pleasure associated with that. And I'm not going to deny that I still maintain a very large record collection. I have shelves behind me with about 15, 20,000 records. I'm not, claiming that I want to get rid of them, but
Miles Davis?
Yes. And these are not, things that I'm trying to say are obsolete or to ignore them. I just think that intelligently, as we're given the means to do these things, we have to add them to the mix, because I think they're helping us maintain the level of knowledge and appreciation for music that we claim to have. Now, that might be different depending on who we're thinking or talking about, but as DJs go, it's obvious that, if we want to remain fresh, we constantly have to look for new material, new suggestions, and that really doesn't go necessarily for just new product, I think. And taking the specific example of African music discovery, there are literally tens of thousands of titles that very, very few people seem to know about. I know I'm discovering some of them daily, whether they're from Senegal, from Mozambique, or from Cameroon, or, Ivory Coast, or whatever. I mean, Kenya, it goes on and on and on. And the point there is that I feel a lot of music we hear today is actually based on sampling other older records, right? And I think part of the job as a DJ, the knowledge is that instead of just being into this track that was just recently sampled by one of your DJ heroes or producer heroes, isn't it better if you could actually figure out where it came from and what the original sounded like? And I think there's a certain sport there. What I mean by that is not just for the sake of, being a train spotter at all, but it's more when you hear a new record that samples a piece of an old track, it could send you into a rabbit hole of knowledge where once you find that track, you could actually find associated things with it that the same person produced or similar artists from that time period did.
Shout out to whosampled.com if any of the listeners
I'm just saying, like, in my mind, I feel that these are activities that are greatly enhanced by the use of the appropriate digital tools when they're available. I just think that at large, what really has made a big difference for me, both in terms of music discovery and music appreciation, is that having these private communities, it has had the effect of filtering, weeding through the uninteresting or uncommitted element, the people who are just there for casual, giggles or, I'm not saying I have anything against doing big up to the latest Ibiza banger that everybody else is already playing. I mean, there's a place for that, but I think at large, if we're able to create virtual communities that are tight-knit and private, and where a lot of that information is not just shared, but we're also inspiring each other by constantly challenging each other's preconceived notions about what things should be. I don't see that as alienating or having the same Black Mirror effect that people keep referring to when they talk about an all digital future. I think what's really important there is to keep our ambitions in check and to do it in a measured and conscious manner where we remain in control of our digital destinies rather than relegate and capitulate and let others do it for us because we're too lazy, we're too, amorphous or whatever else. It really all has to do with not losing sight of what's being done to us through addictive technologies that kind of promise us to simplify or make life more entertaining or whatever it is. But in the process of doing that, we also are giving up some of our basic freedoms and some of our basic choice. Say, if I was someone who was living 30 years ago and I was propelled into this future today and someone told me, oh, by the way, now you don't decide what you read anymore. An algorithm decides what you get to, what you are allowed to see according to a profile that they've built of you and some other factors that you're not allowed to know about. And it is decided for you what you will read. And then, things like what we've seen happen with Cambridge Analytica, opinion manipulation, and all the rest happens because people on the programming side are astute enough to design tools that are micro-targeting users and showing them things in their feed that they have no control over because it's advertised or sponsored.
Where you want to encourage people to kind of go off the beaten path a little bit. And if there was an analogy with traveling, everybody's going to get the recommendation to go to Paris, to go to Tokyo, go to New York. And
no,
it's those kind
it's
of
not really that.
People who will go outside of that.
It's go to Paris if that's what you want to do. But don't go to Paris just because some algorithmic suggestion engine told you that it would be good to go. There's a big difference. In other words, on one hand, you're passive, and the people who design these software agents and programs are counting on your passivity to be able to manipulate you in ways, and this goes very much for music just as well. But you always have the choice and the alternative. For example, you can decide, well, I'm not just going to spend any time at all on social media. I'm just going to go to the record store and only find out about records through the record store or to my friends. Okay. I respect that because even though you could argue that that person is limiting themselves and closing themselves off to a great deal of other important recommendations and options. At least in my mind, they are firmly in control of that. And as such, it will be whatever they decide to invest as far as how much time they want to spend doing it and whatever else. Whereas if people are just constantly spending time on services where everything comes to them as an algorithmic recommendation, then yes, it goes to scale, but it only be reflecting the priorities of those who are spamming them. And for all we know, those algorithms are both very coarse, very unsophisticated, and really optimized to serve the needs of the advertisers who fund the air quote free social networks because we are paying with our data, of course. But I think this is a fundamental difference in the approach. And when it comes to music discovery, it also makes a big difference because I don't believe that I'm ever going to get spammed with that weird Brazilian record from 1982 that was only released on a cassette.
Yeah.
But I could discover it if I speak to someone who has been spending a lot of time digging through crates and finding these things. So again, I think there's a big difference between letting ourselves being dominated and passively follow these technological monsters that are basically ruling most people's lives nowadays. And as creators and DJs, we have to develop alternative ways where we can remain in control of the narrative and create open platforms where we're able to share that with each other. And I believe that in some respect, once I've done that homework and I've done this research and I've spoken on to a lot of people, etc., I'm able to go on the stream and share that with my audience. I mean, it's now about 4 years plus some months that I've started streaming since the beginning of the pandemic. And I got to be honest with you, I think it's fundamentally altered my approach to sharing music with people, because it feels to me like, in some ways, I mean, after 46 years of playing club bangers to crowds, I'm pretty sure I kind of know how to do that. But streaming is offering such a broader scope in the ways I could share music and my passion for things with people. I respect the fact that certain artists will always be one-trick ponies, and they only interested in their brand, their specific narrow interpretation of how they can market themselves to the public, and that's all they're willing to share, because they feel that if they don't do that, they're going to confuse people. I'm having these arguments with some of my friends, but I also think that for someone such as myself, if I was adopting such a restrictive posture and only presenting to the public and only sharing with them that very specific thing for which I'm known for, and only marketing that, and whatever I do would only be oriented towards that, I think there would be a great loss of all these other things that I'm very passionate about and that hopefully I enjoy sharing.
Yeah.
Not just discovering, but also listening and sharing, and streaming has really made that possible. When I look back at all the different streams that I've done through the years, the themes have been so wide-ranging and varied, whether I'm, celebrating jazz funk or, African folk music or musique concrète from, the Irkam days and, Stockhausen. I can't emphasize enough how liberating it is for someone like me to have access to a platform where somehow I don't feel there are any boundaries, in the same way that, to some degree, when you step into the DJ booth of a club, you're expected to do. Because, I mean, let's face it, people are paying me or other DJs very large sums of money. And in order for that money to be paid, they have to sell enough tickets to be able to recoup it. And there definitely are expectations from the people who buy those tickets to, see me doing things that they are expecting me to do. At large, even though you could say, well, yes, there always will be a percentage of any crowd that is very adventurous. Yeah. Like, say, for example, I can remember one club in London in particular that was well known for this, which was Plastic People.
Yeah, one of the best.
In the 2000s.
One of the best.
And I definitely remember some of my sets at Plastic People were very much full of surprises and mind-blowing moments, because I was bringing things to the table.
You could push the boundaries.
Right. But it's still, very, very rare for these situations to exist. I sort of feel the same way about Climax in Bali. And to be honest, when I'm looking back on my year of DJing, all the gigs I got, I mean, I played at that place La Paloma in Barcelona. It was just like, I was dumbfounded by a room that has existed for 106 years. And they asked me to come and play
dance hall?
Yes.
Yes, that's
big,
beautiful. Yeah.
And majestic. And they asked me to come and do a disco set. And it was wonderful. It was amazing. And I feel so blessed in a way that, post-pandemic, one thing that has happened, which I think is worthy of being talked about, is just that because I did so many streams and I was so eclectic and I managed to broach on so many different musical topics, I think it turned off the predictable club banger crowd of promoters from wanting to book me in places where basically the crowd that comes is only interested in the predictable club bangers. And to be honest, there's thousands of other DJs that are far more skilled than I am at doing that and feeling very happy doing it. But
I love that the live streaming sort of gave you this breath of fresh air, where there was no expectations. You could go explore.
Not me. Because I posted and shared a lot of these to either Mixcloud or other platform, the promoters and the bookers got to hear what I was really doing. And I'm sure it scared some people off because they were expecting, the generic use. Before the pandemic, some of the sets I was known for was like the tech house bro kind of crowd thing.
Well,
And I was playing a lot of
ultimately,
techno too.
that's
And
a beautiful thing,
I
man.
was
I think that's
I was
positive.
making good money doing it, and I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
But when they listen to my streams and they go, wait, is this the same guy we booked to play generic, late night bangers? And no, it wasn't. So they stopped being interested in booking me, or if I got an occasional inquiry, but very few.
I mean, I think that's probably for the best then. Like,
Well, but that's the point, as
yeah,
I'm saying.
yeah,
Because I was able to share all this music through the streams, it sort of encouraged people that were more open-minded or had more diverse audiences to book me. And as a result, when I'm looking back on 2024, I'm amazed by the amount of gig opportunities I got, which were far more on the eclectic front, and where people were actually delighted to hear me play stuff that was kind of like less, generic and more, inspired. And I just feel that had it not been for those streams, I probably would have never managed to do that. And the culmination of that was not just that the musical format was important, but I also started specifying for some of my gigs, not all of them, because in many cases I just can't. But I started going back to doing all night long sets. The trend nowadays seems to be, well, how can you last 90 minutes? 90 minutes is too long. 2 hours? Oh my God. Meanwhile, here I am. I'll be 71 years old in 2 months, and I'm playing 6, 7, 8 hour sets. It seems that the longer I play, the more people enjoy it, because I'm able to really fully develop and stretch out and go places. And I think that to me is really what is motivating for people such as myself to stay in the game, because we are given a platform and an opportunity to share this knowledge, for better or for worse. You could say that in certain cases, such as myself, but I know people who have far more of a selection than I do. Say, for example, someone like Giles Peterson, who I don't think I can really hold a candle to, because he's just like on a whole different encyclopedic level. But I try on my own to do a little bit of that, of blowing people's minds by being able to find out things that unexpected, but also little musical treasures that you never knew existed. And you can't really do that in the scope of a 2-hour set. Yet, because of the open format of what it is to be streaming,
no expectations. There's like this freedom. There's a freedom that sort of comes with it.
That's the most important aspect of it.
I love that. I love that.
I think, to be fair,
I feel like we've come full circle in the conversation, all the way back around to live streaming at the start.
But
we were talking about.
This is the thing, though. It's not to say that I'm against structured situations. Say, like, for example, if I step into someone else's streaming schedule, because I understand you're starting to develop this whole host system where you have radio stations that stream pretty much around the clock. And within those radio stations, you have a lot of hosts that come in to do their programs, right?
Yeah, that's right.
How is that working for you, by the way?
Yeah, I mean, for Mixcloud, it's amazing, because obviously you have the radio stations who have a ton of people and a ton of hosts on them. But at the moment, or up until recently, they could only upload onto that main radio station account. And so now we built the ability for both the radio presenter or DJ and the radio station to basically kind of co-own something, like a collaboration, like you see on Instagram. And so everything that goes up goes out to both sets of communities, so the radio stations and the DJ or radio presenter. So I just love that you have found like this new freedom to express yourself, discover new music, curate new sounds, and just explore different places with the live streaming. I think that's really what it kind of is all about in a way. And I'm just conscious that we've kind of run quite a lot over time, but it's all good. It's been a great conversation. But before we wrap, I actually wanted to ask you one last thing, which was, you've been in this game for decades, and you are clearly very, very knowledgeable and savvy about things like copyright, generative AI, the in-depth knowledge of how mechanical and sound recordings work. So I was wondering, if you were to think about a young DJ or producer listening to this podcast, and do you have any advice in terms of places or ways that they can learn about these things? Where do you learn about them? What What would you say to that?
That is a tricky topic because, like, let's say, I remember clearly being invited. I do speaking engagements, by the way, and I was invited to speak at a university in Manchester, if I remember. And people were asking me sort of pretty much exactly this kind of advice. And this was over 10 years ago. And these were students from the music programs. And I basically told them that if they think that they're going to become the next Steve Albini or major producer who is going to make a living from working in the studio, signing undiscovered bands and grooming them and turning them into major attractions that get signed to big labels and so on. I truthfully and honestly felt heartbroken at saying so, but I think they had a better chance at taking that money they were investing in their musical education and going to Las Vegas and hitting the jackpot, because the odds will be better in Las Vegas for them to make money than they will be for them to be successful and have a lifelong career doing it by thinking that from having graduated from a fancy university, they're just going to find employment. With the caveat that I say, the only type of work that I see as making sense in how saturated this market has become was that if they work for corporate jobs, TV broadcast, gaming, sound effects editing, or people who make sound libraries and all that, then yeah, there may be opportunities, but at large, the glamorous aspect of it, I think, is kind of come and gone. I think in order for me to give the advice, I really would have to understand what the person's motivations are. In other words, sometimes over the course of the last few years, I've met very young people, including kids that were like 12 or 14, and they're like, oh my God, you're a DJ. I want to be like you. I want to be famous. It kind of dawned upon me that to them, their perception of it had nothing whatsoever to do with being passionate about music. It was, well, I want to have 20,000 people following me on Instagram, or I want to, be recognized, or I want to be able to go to a club and be walked into the VIP. I have no idea what they're expecting out of it, but somehow I would say, as a preamble to my advice, it's important for us to define what your goals are. Because unfortunately, I don't think everyone's goals are the same. Am I making sense with this?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So now, if you happen to be in the category who are passionate about music and who see it as something that once you really got the bug, you can't shake it out, even if it means that, you're going to break up with your lover because your record collection got too big in the apartment. We know a few of those, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
The advice would be to learn from those you respect, follow those who you think have made contributions to the art, and try to figure out who motivates you. Even though this is a very long time ago, and obviously I'm quite cautious that this was a different period in history, but I remember being a student at the university in France in 1971, and the first week I went there away from my family, I spent all my allowance money on 2 Jimi Hendrix albums, and I could still eat because they paid for the food program within the university. But I had blown all my expense money on 2 Jimi Hendrix albums because they basically changed my life. And, the reason I'm using this analogy is to say that you can only do what you're motivated to do. And in some way, I think the fallacy is that a lot of people are attracted by these activities, not all for the same reasons, obviously, but if you are one of those who comes from loving music, then lower the expectations, lower the threshold so that you don't constantly set yourself up for failure. As soon as you start learning certain things, whether it's music knowledge about song programming and playlisting, if you're a DJ, or whether it's learning how to use DAW if you're a producer, or etc., lower the expectations that, you're not doing it because you want to kick that other guy's ass and show the world. I mean, that's fair enough if that's your goal. But I think you're going to set yourself up for failure time and time again, because that market, these markets, whether it's the DJ or producer or et cetera markets, they're all so saturated with people who have taken the same approach before you, and you're late. What, however, is going to be, in my opinion, more respectable is once you've set your expectation and that bar so very low, start building it on appreciation of music. What is it that makes you love it? Focus on that, and don't think about what it's going to mean as far as being successful and all that. Try to develop a narrative where you use records you love to build an aesthetic, feel like you're part of a movement, associate with people who inspire you, and just slowly grow that. I mean, that's, I guess, a whole different conversation as to the speed at which these things happen and whether we have the ability to be able to afford to wait for what people would generally consider the gestation time for these activities. To put in perspective, an Indian sitar or tabla master has spent 15 to 25 years of their lives developing their craft to the point where it becomes second nature to what they do. So when they step on that stage and they perform in front of people, they're telling you a story that comes from life experience and many, many, many thousands of hours of having developed their craft into a mastery of what they do. You want to compare yourself to that because you just spent 12 hours learning how to use some software to put two records together? And I would say in this day and age, I would rather people set that bar for those expectations very low and constantly go from success to success, because they're not going to keep getting disappointed, rather than to think they're going to become the next, influencer artist who really is kind of doing it for completely different reasons. Now, for those who may be asking for that advice, I'm sorry, but I don't have any influencer advice. I don't think I'm qualified. I'm qualified to deliver it, but otherwise, I would say sticking to the basics might be a very arduous and frustrating path, but there's nothing wrong with just building what you do with the love of music and finding others who share the same level of appreciation. And hopefully, over the time that it is taking, people can figure out whether they have it in them to make this into a career, or was it just a hobby or a passing fad? Because I think it's really not fair to want to set up people for failure.
Yeah, I agree with that. It makes me think of that saying, was it unhappiness is the difference between expectations and reality, or something along those lines?
And I personally would prefer to suggest to people that they keep trying it with no expectations. There was definitely a turning point in my career. Having bought those two Jimi Hendrix albums, I was listening to them obsessively because I was trying to emulate the drummer, Mitch Mitchell, as I was a drummer back in those years. And once I heard them, it kind of completely changed my outlook. And there was just no way I was going to follow the career path that I thought was laid out for me in the university. This was not an easy thing to do. Only managed to make it by being homeless, by having no money. I'm not going to advise anyone to do it like that, but all I know is that the point that really kind of informed everything else and every decision I made was that I had so much passion for it. I was so driven. I didn't care. There was no other choice. So maybe the advice is be true to yourself and really figure out how far you're willing to go in order to accomplish those goals. How much exposure are you willing to gamble and take in order to make it happen? And I find it something that I would have to give with a shit ton of disclaimers underneath and fine print of, I am not giving you advice. Please do not follow my directions. I'm not responsible if anything happens to you after, doing the things I've suggested. And my lawyer, who's right over there, is telling me to add all these other, disclaimers.
The caveats.
Yeah. But the point, though, is that in the end, it's a very difficult thing to do in the sense that everyone is a different person. Everyone has a different tolerance for pain and the degree of sacrifice they're willing to make in order to further their art.
Yeah. Yeah.
To quote something that was in the life story of David Mancuso, who founded a party called Loft in New York.
Of course. Yeah.
Somewhere in the mid-60s, he woke up one day and decided to, I guess he put a shirt and pants on, and he donated everything he owned to his friends. He walked out of his apartment, and he was totally free of everything. He had owed nothing to anyone. He owned nothing. I mean, obviously it's a story as old as the world. Was it Diogenes who did that in ancient Greece? And I'm not advocating by all means that this is what my advice is to you. I'm only using this as an illustration to say that sometimes some people who have been the most significant influences on culture have undertaken some very arduous and big struggles in their personal path to get to where they got, and that it's certainly not by all means a rose garden, and no one is guaranteeing anything. And I think the story I'm relaying happened more than 60 years ago. In today's saturated marketplace, you have all these other problems on top of that, which is basically that if you're trying to do something that 12 million other people are right now currently also trying to do, chances are mathematically you'll never succeed, except if you do it because you love it without expectations of anything immediate.
Love that. Yeah. I think that's a beautiful point to end on. I think that's just sums it up really, really nicely.
So I feel extremely blessed and very lucky to not just have managed to retain that original enthusiasm and passion, but also in the process have associated with a number of people who share it and who see that in what I do and somehow are helping support it or contributing. And the point there is that none of us ever invented anything. It's very, very important to remain mindful of those who inspire us. And I think that's part of the advice, is identify those figures who you think are crucial and important in the aesthetic of what you're trying to do, and figure out what it is that they do and why they're doing it and what's driving them to do it. And maybe that'll be part of the solution to how you're going to figure out how to make it.
I love it. Thank you very much, Francois.
You're welcome.
It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you for spending the time with us. Hopefully we can do this again someday. I hope people enjoyed it. I hope they learned something. I hope to make it educational and entertaining. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.